The email sat in Thomas's inbox like a ticking bomb. "I know what she did," read the subject line. His trembling finger hovered over it, heart pounding against his ribs. After 3 years of struggling as a single father, working overtime at Reynolds Marketing while his ex-wife lived lavishly with her new husband, Thomas was about to discover why she'd really left. The truth would shatter everything he thought he knew about their marriage, and offer him a chance at justice he never imagined possible. Thomas Parker stared at his computer screen, the cursor blinking mockingly as he tried to focus on the quarterly report due tomorrow. The office around him hummed with the usual Monday morning energy, but his mind kept drifting to the weekend ahead, another weekend where he'd have to explain to his teenage daughter why they couldn't afford the class trip to Washington when her mother and stepfather had just posted photos from their second European vacation this year. Coffee? Thomas looked up to see Rachel, the new marketing coordinator, standing beside his desk with 2 steaming mugs. At 42, Thomas wasn't used to the younger staff paying him much attention. Most days he felt invisible, just another divorced dad with perpetual exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes. "You look like you could use this," Rachel said, placing one mug on his desk. Triple shot. The good stuff from downstairs, not the break room sludge. "Thanks," Thomas said, surprised by the gesture. "That obvious I'm struggling today?" Rachel leaned against his desk, lowering her voice. "I noticed you've been here until 8 every night this week. Everything okay?" Thomas took a sip of the coffee, buying time before answering. The truth was, nothing had been okay since Vanessa had walked out 3 years ago, claiming she needed to find herself, only to find herself with Bradley Westfield, the real estate developer whose net worth had apparently been what she was searching for all along. "Just trying to stay on top of things," Thomas said finally. "Single parenting doesn't leave much time for work during home hours." Rachel nodded sympathetically. "My sister's in the same boat. Her ex pays child support at least, though not without a fight every month." Thomas's bitter laugh escaped before he could stop it. "Must be nice. Mine managed to convince the judge she needed time to establish her career before paying support. Meanwhile, she's living in a penthouse downtown while I'm trying to figure out how to pay for my daughter's college applications." Rachel's expression shifted, something Thomas couldn't quite read flickering across her face. "Vanessa Westfield, right? Used to be Parker?" Thomas stiffened. "You know her?" "Not personally," Rachel said carefully. "But I used to work at Meridian Partners before coming here. The name of the prestigious investment firm where Bradley Westfield was a senior partner hung in the air between them." Thomas waited, sensing Rachel had more to say. "Look," she continued, glancing around to ensure no one was listening, "there's something you should know. Something I saw while I was there that never sat right with me. Can we grab lunch today? Somewhere private?" 4 hours later, Thomas sat across from Rachel at a corner table in a small cafe 6 blocks from their office, his untouched sandwich forgotten as she slid a folder across the table. "I shouldn't have these," Rachel said quietly. "But when I processed the year-end bonuses at Meridian, I noticed something strange. Vanessa was on the payroll 6 months before your divorce was finalized. Not as an employee, as a consultant." Thomas frowned, opening the folder to find payment records and email printouts. "That's impossible. She was still living with me then. She didn't start working until after." "She wasn't working," Rachel interrupted. "At least not in the traditional sense. She was feeding Bradley information about your company's acquisition plans. Information she got from your home office." The realization hit Thomas like a physical blow. The nights Vanessa had brought him dinner while he worked late at home. Her sudden interest in his projects. The way she'd ask casual questions about the companies Reynolds was targeting for acquisition. Reynolds lost the Hartman deal because Meridian swooped in at the last minute with a better offer, Thomas said slowly, memories rearranging themselves into a horrifying new picture. Bradley's biggest deal that year. The one that made him partner. Rachel nodded grimly. The timeline matches perfectly. And there's more. Look at the last page. Thomas turned to the final document, a prenuptial agreement between Vanessa and Bradley dated 2 months before she'd asked Thomas for a divorce. His vision blurred as he read the terms, a clause specifically stating that in the event of their marriage, Bradley would use his influence to ensure Vanessa received favorable terms in her divorce from Thomas, including minimal financial responsibility. She planned it all, Thomas whispered, his voice hollow. Used me for information, sabotaged my company, cost us millions, and then arranged to pay almost nothing in child support while she lives off the profits. I'm sorry, Rachel said, reaching across to touch his hand. I left Meridian partly because of things like this. The ethical violations were constant, but this one, knowing there was a child involved. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Thomas looked up, meeting her eyes. Why tell me now? It's been 3 years. Because Bradley's firm is about to make another move on one of your clients. And because... Rachel hesitated. Because I saw your daughter's photo on your desk. She looks just like my niece. And I kept thinking about how I'd feel if someone did this to my sister. Thomas sat back, mind racing. The betrayal cut deep, but beneath the pain, something else was emerging, a cold, clear purpose. What am I supposed to do with this information? He asked finally. Rachel gathered the documents, returning them to the folder. That's up to you. But if you decide to do something, you should know that our boss, Victoria, has history with Bradley Westfield. Something personal from what I've heard. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Victoria? Our Victoria? Ice Queen Victoria who terrifies the entire marketing department? Rachel's smile was small but significant. The very same. And from what I've gathered, she's been waiting years for a chance to settle that score. When Thomas returned to the office, he found a meeting request from Victoria Reynolds herself waiting in his inbox. Subject line, regarding your ex-wife's activities. His finger hovered over the accept button, heart racing. After 3 years of struggling while Vanessa thrived through deception, a path to justice had suddenly appeared. The question was whether he had the courage to take it. Victoria's office occupied the corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Thomas had only been inside twice before, once when he was hired, and once when he'd received a promotion 2 years ago. Now, as he sat across from her imposing glass desk, he felt like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. At 55, Victoria Reynolds commanded respect without asking for it. Her silver-streaked dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her charcoal suit impeccably tailored. But it was her eyes that held Thomas's attention, sharp, intelligent, and right now, burning with barely contained fury as she reviewed the documents Rachel had provided. I always suspected, Victoria said finally, closing the folder. Bradley Westfield has a pattern of using people to get information. I just never imagined he'd stoop to recruiting someone's wife. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Rachel mentioned you have history with him. Victoria's smile was cold. Bradley and I were partners, both in business and personally, 15 years ago. He used similar tactics to push me out of our firm and took everything we'd built together. I started Reynolds Marketing from scratch afterward. She stood, moving to the window to gaze out at the city. The difference is, I didn't have a child to support. I could afford to take risks, work 20-hour days, eat ramen for a year while I rebuilt. You haven't had that luxury. No, Thomas agreed quietly. Every decision I've made has been about stability for Sophia. Victoria turned back to face him. And how stable do you feel, Thomas? Working overtime while struggling to make ends meet? Watching your ex-wife enjoy the fruits of her betrayal? The question hit home with painful accuracy. Not very, he admitted. But what choice do I have? Victoria returned to her desk, leaning forward with her hands flat on the surface. You have choices now. These documents prove corporate espionage. They prove Vanessa was paid to steal confidential information. They prove Bradley Westfield knowingly participated in this scheme. Thomas felt a flicker of hope, quickly followed by doubt. But after 3 years? And against someone with Westfield's resources? You're thinking like someone who's been beaten down, Victoria said, her voice softening slightly. I understand. I was there once. But you're not alone in this fight anymore. She pressed a button on her desk phone. Send them in, please. The door opened to reveal Rachel and a man Thomas recognized as James Harrington, the company's lead counsel. I've briefed James on the situation, Victoria explained as they took seats. He believes we have a strong case not just against Meridian Partners, but against Vanessa and Bradley personally. James nodded, opening his laptop. The statute of limitations hasn't expired. We have documented evidence of corporate espionage, breach of fiduciary duty, and potentially fraud in the divorce proceedings if Vanessa concealed these payments. Thomas's mind reeled with possibilities. What would this mean, exactly? For Reynolds Marketing, it means potential recovery of damages from the lost Hartman deal, approximately $12 million, James explained. For you personally, it means grounds to reopen the divorce settlement based on fraud, which could significantly alter the financial arrangements and support obligations. And for Vanessa and Bradley, Victoria added with grim satisfaction, it means potential criminal charges, significant financial penalties, and in Bradley's case, likely disbarment from securities trading. Thomas sat back, overwhelmed. This seems extreme. What they did was extreme, Victoria countered. They conspired to steal from this company, manipulated you, and then arranged matters to leave you struggling while they profited. That's not just unethical, it's illegal. Rachel leaned forward. Thomas, you don't have to decide everything today. But we wanted you to know your options. Victoria's gaze was steady. The company will pursue its claims regardless, we have a duty to our shareholders. But how personally involved you want to be, especially regarding the divorce settlement, is your choice. Thomas thought of Sophia, of the opportunities she'd missed because of money, of the stress that had become their constant companion. He thought of Vanessa's smug smile in the courtroom when the judge had accepted her plea of financial hardship despite her new husband's wealth. If I do this, he said slowly, what's the first step? Victoria's smile was the most genuine expression he'd seen from her. The first step is letting me call my ex-husband. Thomas blinked in confusion. Your ex-husband? District Attorney Michael Reynolds, Victoria clarified. We remained good friends after our divorce. Unlike some people, we believe in ethical behavior even when relationships end. For the first time in 3 years, Thomas felt something like hope unfurling in his chest. And then? Victoria leaned forward, her voice dropping to a determined whisper. And then, Thomas, we make them pay for what they've done. If you ever want revenge, I'm right here. Not just for the company's sake, but because what they did to you and your daughter was unforgivable. The next morning, Thomas arrived at the office to find Victoria waiting by his desk, holding 2 cups of coffee. I spoke with Michael last night, she said without preamble, handing him one of the cups. He's interested in the case. Very interested. Thomas took the coffee, noticing several of his co-workers watching them curiously. Victoria Reynolds rarely ventured onto the main floor, and never to deliver coffee to mid-level marketing managers. That's good news? Thomas ventured. It's excellent news, Victoria confirmed. But before things start moving, I need to know you're absolutely committed. Once we file charges, there's no going back. Bradley will fight with everything he has. Thomas thought about the conversation he'd had with Sophia the previous night. Not about the case, she was too young to burden with those details, but about dreams and fairness and standing up for yourself. What would you do if someone took something that belonged to you, Dad? She'd asked, talking about a situation with friends at school. I'd try to get it back, he'd told her. Not because of the thing itself, but because it's important to show people they can't just take what isn't theirs. She'd nodded thoughtfully. That's what I thought you'd say. Looking at Victoria now, Thomas felt a certainty he hadn't experienced in years. I'm in. All the way. Victoria's smile was sharp. Good. Because there's something else you should know. The Hartman deal wasn't the only one Vanessa compromised. We found evidence of at least 3 other acquisitions that failed under suspicious circumstances during that period. Thomas felt his stomach drop. How bad? Total estimated damages to Reynolds Marketing, approximately $30 million, Victoria said calmly. And that's before punitive damages. The implications were staggering. That would destroy them. Yes, Victoria agreed without a hint of remorse. It would. The question is, can you handle that? Knowing what it will do to Vanessa's life? Thomas thought about the nights he'd stayed up worrying about bills. About explaining to Sophia why they couldn't afford the things her friends took for granted. About the retirement fund he'd had to drain during the divorce. I can handle it, he said firmly. But I want something specific in the settlement. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Which is? A college fund for Sophia. Guaranteed, irrevocable, regardless of what happens with the rest of their assets. Victoria nodded approvingly. We'll make it happen. Now, are you ready to make a statement to the investigators this afternoon? Thomas straightened his shoulders. More than ready. The investigation moved with surprising speed. By Friday, Thomas found himself sitting in a conference room at the district attorney's office, surrounded by lawyers, investigators, and financial analysts. Across from him sat Michael Reynolds, Victoria's ex-husband, a man whose reputation for prosecuting white-collar crime had made him something of a legend in the city. The evidence is compelling, Michael said, reviewing the documents spread before him. Especially with the additional cases Victoria's team has uncovered. We'll be filing charges next week. Thomas nodded, still somewhat dazed by how quickly events were unfolding. What happens then? Then it gets public, Michael explained. Very public. Are you prepared for that? For Sophia to potentially hear about this from classmates or see it on the news? It was the aspect of the case that troubled Thomas most. I've been thinking about that. I need to tell her something before it breaks, but I'm not sure how much. Rachel, who had accompanied Thomas as a witness, spoke up. If I may, my sister went through something similar with her ex. She found that being honest with her kids, in an age-appropriate way, worked better than trying to shield them completely. Michael nodded agreement. In my experience, children often handle these situations better than we expect, especially when they understand it's about justice, not revenge. Thomas wasn't entirely convinced, but he appreciated the advice. I'll talk to her this weekend. As the meeting concluded, Victoria pulled Thomas aside. There's one more thing you should know. Bradley called me this morning. Thomas stiffened. What did he want? To negotiate, Victoria said with a cold smile. He's heard rumors. Offered to settle the company's claims quietly, $5 million and a non-disclosure agreement. What did you tell him? Victoria's eyes gleamed. I told him that 15 years ago, when he betrayed me, I made a promise to myself that if I ever had the chance to return the favor, I wouldn't settle for pennies on the dollar. And then I hung up. Thomas couldn't help but admire her resolve. You've been waiting a long time for this. Justice is patient, Victoria replied. And so am I. That evening, Thomas sat with Sophia at their small kitchen table, picking at the pizza they'd ordered to celebrate the end of the week. At 16, she was perceptive enough to sense something was different. Dad, what's going on? She asked finally. You've been weird all week. Like, distracted but also. I don't know, different somehow. Thomas set down his slice, gathering his courage. Soph, there's something I need to tell you. Something about your mom and Bradley, and why our divorce happened the way it did. Sophia's expression grew guarded. What about them? Carefully, Thomas explained the situation in terms she could understand, how her mother had taken information from his work to help Bradley, how they had planned things to avoid financial responsibility, how it had affected their lives for the past 3 years. So all those times she said she couldn't afford to help with stuff, she was lying? Sophia asked. As Sophia processed this information, Thomas could see a range of emotions crossing her face: confusion, hurt, and finally, anger. So all those times she said she couldn't afford to help with stuff, she was lying? Sophia asked, her voice small but steady. Thomas nodded gently. It appears that way, yes. The evidence shows she and Bradley had planned things very carefully. Sophia stared at her plate, silent for a long moment. Is that why you've been working so much? Taking all those extra projects? Because Mom wasn't helping when she could have been? The question pierced Thomas's heart. He'd tried so hard to shield her from their financial struggles, but children always knew more than parents realized. Partly, he admitted. But I never want you to think I resented a single minute of working for us. You're worth every late night, every weekend shift. Sophia looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. What happens now? Are you going to sue them or something? The company is pursuing legal action, Thomas explained carefully. And yes, I'm also going to ask the court to revisit our divorce settlement because it was based on false information. But Sophia, I want you to know that I've made sure whatever happens, your college fund will be protected. I don't care about college money, Sophia said fiercely. I care that she lied to us. That she chose him and money over us. Thomas reached across the table to take her hand. I know it hurts. And it's okay to be angry. But I don't want this situation to make you bitter or untrusting. Some people make bad choices, but that doesn't mean everyone will let you down. Sophia squeezed his hand. Like you didn't let me down. Even when it was hard. And like Rachel and Victoria didn't let me down when they could have just looked the other way, Thomas added. There are good people in the world, sophomore. Sometimes they show up when you least expect it. The following Monday, Thomas arrived at work to find the office buzzing with tension. Victoria had called an all-staff meeting for 9 a.m., and rumors were flying about its purpose. Rachel appeared at his desk, coffee in hand as had become their morning ritual. Ready for this? She asked quietly. As ready as I'll ever be, Thomas replied, accepting the cup gratefully. The conference room was packed when they arrived, with Victoria standing at the head of the table, flanked by James Harrington and 2 people Thomas didn't recognize. Thank you all for coming, Victoria began once everyone was seated. I've called this meeting to inform you of a significant development affecting Reynolds Marketing. As of this morning, the district attorney's office has filed charges against Meridian Partners, Bradley Westfield, and Vanessa Westfield for corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets, and fraud. A murmur swept through the room as Victoria continued, explaining the basics of the case without mentioning Thomas by name. He felt eyes turning toward him nonetheless, colleagues connecting the dots between his ex-wife's name and the case. This company was built on integrity and hard work, Victoria concluded. When someone attempts to undermine those values for personal gain, we have a responsibility to respond. I expect this case will generate significant media attention in the coming days. All inquiries should be directed to our legal team. As the meeting dispersed, Thomas found himself surrounded by colleagues offering support and expressing outrage on his behalf. The solidarity was unexpected and deeply moving. Victoria approached him as the room cleared. The DA's office served the warrants this morning. Bradley and Vanessa will be arraigned tomorrow. Thomas nodded, a complex mix of emotions washing over him. How did they react? Victoria's smile was grim. According to Michael's team, Bradley immediately called his lawyers. Vanessa, on the other hand, apparently had quite a public meltdown. Seems she wasn't aware of just how extensive their legal exposure might be. She didn't know. Bradley appears to have minimized the risks when recruiting her, Victoria explained. Classic manipulation, promised the rewards without fully disclosing the potential consequences. Thomas absorbed this information, unsure how to feel about it. Despite everything, he had once loved Vanessa. The thought of her being manipulated by Bradley added yet another layer of complexity to an already painful situation. This doesn't change what she did, Victoria added, reading his expression. She made her choices. But it might explain why she made them. Before Thomas could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa, the first direct communication they'd had in months that wasn't about Sophia's schedule. "We need to talk. Now. This is insane." Thomas showed the message to Victoria, who raised an eyebrow. "Your call. But I'd recommend having counsel present for any conversation." "I'll think about it," Thomas said, pocketing his phone. "Right now, I need to focus on work. And on Sophia." The media storm broke that afternoon. By evening, Thomas's phone was flooded with notifications as the story spread across local news and then national business publications. The narrative quickly formed around David versus Goliath themes, the struggling single father betrayed by his ex-wife and her wealthy new husband, the small marketing firm fighting back against corporate raiders. Thomas turned off his phone and spent the evening helping Sophia with her calculus homework, grateful for the normalcy of the activity amid the chaos swirling around them. The next morning, he arrived at work to find Rachel waiting by his desk, her expression troubled. "Have you seen this?" she asked, holding out her tablet. On the screen was a statement from Bradley Westfield's attorney, claiming that Thomas had orchestrated the entire situation as revenge for his ex-wife leaving him, that the documents were fabricated, and that Reynolds Marketing was engaging in a vindictive smear campaign. "They're calling you a jilted, bitter ex-husband," Rachel said softly. "It's disgusting." Thomas skimmed the statement, a cold anger settling in his chest. "I expected something like this. Bradley's playbook has always been to attack when cornered." "Victoria's furious," Rachel added. "She's called an emergency meeting with the PR team." Thomas nodded, setting down his bag. "I should be there." The meeting was already underway when Thomas arrived, Victoria pacing the conference room as the PR director outlined response strategies. "We don't dignify the personal attacks with a response," Victoria was saying. "We stick to the facts. The evidence. The documented trail of payments and information leaks." She stopped pacing when she saw Thomas. "There you are. Bradley's trying to make this personal, to distract from the evidence. Classic misdirection." "I saw," Thomas said, taking a seat. "I'm not surprised. We need to decide how public you want to be," the PR director explained. "As the directly affected party, your perspective carries weight. But it also exposes you to more scrutiny." Thomas considered this. He'd spent 3 years trying to keep his head down, to avoid conflict, to make the best of a bad situation. Where had that gotten him? "I want to make a statement," he said firmly. "Not just about the case, but about what this represents, how people with power and money think they can take advantage of others without consequences." Victoria smiled approvingly. "That's exactly the right approach. This isn't just about you and Vanessa, or even about Reynolds Marketing and Meridian Partners. It's about accountability." By that afternoon, Thomas found himself sitting across from a journalist from the Business Journal, telling his story with a clarity and conviction that surprised even himself. "The hardest part wasn't the betrayal," he explained. "It was the years afterward, watching them live luxuriously while claiming financial hardship to avoid supporting their own child. It was explaining to my daughter why we couldn't afford things that her mother posted about buying on social media." The journalist nodded sympathetically. "And now that the truth is coming out, what do you hope will happen?" Thomas considered the question carefully. "I hope for justice, of course. But more than that, I hope this case shows others that having money and connections doesn't put you above the law. That eventually, the truth comes to light. As the interview concluded, Thomas felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. For 3 years, he'd carried the burden of his situation alone, trying to protect Sophia, trying to maintain dignity in the face of injustice. Now, finally, he was fighting back. The arraignment the following day became a media spectacle. Thomas sat in the back of the courtroom, watching as Bradley and Vanessa entered with their legal team. Bradley looked composed, every inch the successful businessman in his tailored suit. Vanessa, by contrast, appeared shaken, her usual confidence visibly diminished. When she spotted Thomas, their eyes locked briefly. In that moment, something passed between them, not forgiveness, certainly, but perhaps a flicker of recognition. Of the people they had once been to each other, before ambition and greed had corrupted what they'd built. The charges were read, the pleas entered, not guilty on all counts, as expected. Bail was set, court dates established. The machinery of justice grinding into motion. Outside the courthouse, Thomas found Victoria waiting, a rare cigarette in hand. "Didn't know you smoked," he commented. "I don't, usually," she admitted, taking a final drag before crushing it under her heel. "Special occasions only. How are you holding up?" "Better than I expected," Thomas said truthfully. "Seeing them in there, facing consequences, it feels like the beginning of something, not just the end." Victoria nodded understanding. The beginning of justice. And perhaps the beginning of rebuilding your life on your terms, not theirs. Over the following weeks, the case dominated Thomas's life. Depositions, evidence reviews, meetings with prosecutors. Through it all, he maintained his work at Reynolds Marketing, grateful for the structure and purpose it provided. Rachel became a constant support, bringing coffee, offering encouragement, stepping in to cover projects when legal obligations pulled him away. Their friendship deepened, evolving into something that made Thomas consider possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to contemplate in years. 6 weeks after the charges were filed, Thomas received a call from James Harrington. "Bradley's lawyers have reached out," the attorney informed him. "They want to discuss settlement terms." Thomas felt a surge of conflicting emotions. "What kind of terms?" "Substantial," James replied. "Full restitution to Reynolds Marketing for the lost deals. A significant revision of the divorce settlement, including back support payments and college funding for Sophia. In exchange, they want the criminal charges reduced." "What does Victoria say?" Thomas asked. "She says it's your call," James answered. "The company will be made whole either way. This is about what you need for closure." Thomas thought about it overnight, discussing the options with Sophia, who had shown remarkable maturity throughout the ordeal. "What do you think I should do?" he asked her as they sat on their small apartment balcony, watching the sunset. Sophia considered the question with the thoughtfulness that made him so proud. I think Mom should have to admit what she did. Not just pay money, but actually say it out loud. That she chose money over doing the right thing." Thomas nodded slowly. "That's what I was thinking too." The next day, he presented his counteroffer, full financial restitution as proposed, plus a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing from both Bradley and Vanessa. No reduced charges, that would be up to the district attorney to decide. To Thomas's surprise, they accepted. 1 week later, he sat across from Vanessa in a conference room, lawyers flanking them on both sides, as she signed the settlement documents. "I need to ask," Thomas said quietly as she set down the pen. "Was it worth it? All of this?" Vanessa met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "At the time, it seemed like it would be. Bradley made everything sound so simple, so justified. Just business, he called it. And now?" She glanced toward the window, where outside, reporters waited for the promised statement. "Now I'm about to stand in front of cameras and admit to betraying my family for money. My daughter may never trust me again. So no, Thomas. It wasn't worth it. Her voice cracked slightly on the last words, the first genuine emotion he'd seen from her in years. Sophia is stronger than you think, Thomas said after a moment. More forgiving too. Not right away, maybe. But eventually, if you're honest with her from now on. Vanessa nodded, a flicker of hope crossing her face. Thank you for that. You didn't have to say it. No, Thomas agreed. But it's true anyway. The press conference that followed was brief but powerful. Bradley read a prepared statement acknowledging the corporate espionage scheme. Vanessa followed with her own statement, taking responsibility for her role and expressing regret for the impact on Thomas and Sophia. Standing at the back of the room, Thomas felt no triumph, no vindication, only relief that the truth was finally acknowledged. As the questions ended and the crowd began to disperse, Victoria appeared beside him. Satisfied? She asked. Thomas considered the question. Getting there, he decided. It's a process. Victoria smiled, the expression softening her usually stern features. Justice often is. But you've handled it with remarkable grace. I had good people in my corner, Thomas replied. That makes all the difference. Later that evening, as Thomas prepared dinner, his phone chimed with a text from Rachel, saw the press conference. You did it. Celebratory dinner tomorrow? As he typed his reply, Thomas realized he was smiling, a genuine, unforced smile that felt unfamiliar after so long. The kind of smile that suggested perhaps the hardest parts were behind him, and something new waited ahead. 6 months later, Thomas stood in Victoria's office, reviewing the quarterly projections with a confidence that had been absent for years. The settlement funds had allowed Reynolds Marketing to expand into new markets, and Thomas had been promoted to lead the new division. These numbers are impressive, Victoria noted, scanning the report. You've exceeded expectations in every category. Good team, Thomas replied modestly. And good leadership. Victoria set down the report, studying him thoughtfully. You know, when Rachel first brought this situation to my attention, I saw it primarily as a chance to settle an old score with Bradley. I didn't fully appreciate what it would mean for you personally. It changed everything, Thomas acknowledged. Not just financially, but, it was like reclaiming my narrative. Taking back control. And how is Sophia handling everything? Thomas smiled. Better than I could have hoped. She started speaking to Vanessa again, cautiously, but it's progress. And she got accepted to her first-choice college last week. Full scholarship, but the trust fund will cover everything else she needs. And you and Rachel? Victoria asked with uncharacteristic directness. The office gossip suggests things are going well there. Thomas felt himself blushing slightly. We're taking it slow. But yes, it's good. Really good. Victoria nodded approvingly. Good. You deserve that happiness, Thomas. You've earned it. As Thomas left the office that evening, he paused in the lobby, looking out at the city stretching before him. 3 years of struggle had been followed by 6 months of transformation. Justice had been served, yes, but more importantly, he had found his voice, his strength, and perhaps even a new chance at love. His phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Still on for dinner with Sophia tonight? Made reservations at that Italian place she loves. Thomas smiled as he typed his reply, absolutely. Wouldn't miss it for anything. As he stepped out into the evening air, Thomas reflected on how completely his life had changed since that fateful day when